Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We are going to give it maybe 3 more minutes for more people to join, and then we'll get the workshop started. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Lori Waters. I'm the program manager for the Active Transportation Program at the California Transportation Commission. And thank you for joining us this morning for our 2023 Active Transportation Program workshop. This is a guidelines workshop, and hopefully this should be the last workshop where we cover the guidelines except for maybe quick builds. So we are going to get started. Before we start, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are all at remote locations today because our building was again declared an outbreak site, so we're not supposed to be in there. So we might have some issues of internet dropping or stuff like that. So just be patient with us, and we'll work it out and keep going. So, okay. I think that's it for my introduction. So Alika, do you want to review how people can participate today?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and cover that. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Active Transportation Program Central Workshop. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio and questions tabs. Under the audio tab, you will have the choice to listen in via computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio pin as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio pin is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a question or comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they're registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as part of each topic during this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of this presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click the hand icon located on the right-hand side of your screen to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make this comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as possible to ensure the system has enough time to acknowledge you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read this comment on your behalf. Thank you again for joining us today, and we appreciate you sharing your time and your feedback with us. And with that, Lori, I will hand things back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Alika. So, all right, next slide. Okay, we've been covering this every workshop just to be sure that everyone keeps in mind the basics of the program for this cycle. We have 4 years of funding from fiscal years 23-24 through 26-27. We anticipate similar funding as last cycle, 450 million, 0.5, which is always split between the three components of the ATP, the statewide component, the state small urban and rural component, and the MPO component. So this is what we would like to accomplish today. We will recap our last workshop, which was January 11th, finalize some previously discussed items just to make sure everyone is aware of how we finally landed on everything. We want to discuss our administrative changes and minor language changes and go over action items. So I mentioned this last workshop, but I'll mention it again. The reason that we go through our administrative changes and minor language changes in a workshop with all of the stakeholders is that, first of all, we want to make sure that we're totally transparent on what's being changed in the guidelines, and that sometimes we make some minor language changes that we think are minor language changes, but they have some sort of inadvertent effect on applicants somehow. So, and stakeholders usually catch those for us. So that's another reason we like to make sure we're going through all of that stuff with all of you. Next. Okay, so this was our schedule for workshops, and it's important to pay attention to this because we're actually adding a workshop on February 2nd, which is our next one, and we're going to go do the applications in that workshop. And the reason that we've made that change is because the applications, because they're all electronic, making changes to them is not as easy as you might think. So, and it has to be done through Caltrans IT department, and they need sufficient time to make any changes, and that means even wording changes. So we needed to move up that application workshop to February 2nd. To try to get all of that nailed down so Caltrans has time to make any changes that come up. So then February 2nd, that's when we will cover the scoring rubrics. And then we have last workshop, which is February 23rd. And that's when we can just you know, if there's anything out there that we still need to discuss, then we can do it there. And probably give an update on the quick builds, on what we've changes to the guidelines on quick builds. Because that's the one area that, the one major area that we still haven't really done much with yet. Okay, next. These are the branch workshops that we have been requested. We did one so far last week, and I think it was really successful. So these are the ones that we have coming up. Okay, this is the schedule. There is a commission meeting at the end of, it's actually next week. And I'll present the draft guidelines to the commission at that meeting, along with the draft fund estimate. Caltrans Budgets will present that. So commission meetings are a place that stakeholders can make comments if they want, and for commissioners to make any comments. And then we'll have a hearing at the next commission meeting in March, right before we adopt the guidelines. That's like the very last opportunity for anyone to make comments on the guidelines. And also at that meeting, we will adopt the fund estimate. The fund estimate is where it clearly shows what funding is available for the program, what type of funding it is, and the splits for the three components, along with the funding split between the 10 large MPOs. And then shortly after we adopt the guidelines, we'll put out the call for projects. We'll post the scoring rubrics in March. We might be able to do that a little bit sooner. We're going to try, because it's always useful for the applicants to have the scoring rubrics there when they fill out their applications. And the MPOs will submit their optional guidelines. The MPOs can do their own guidelines for each of their programs. We will probably do the MTC's guidelines early. They usually are done a little bit early, and they like to get theirs adopted as soon as they can. The application deadline is June 15th. That's not a postmark date. It's all electronic, so you need to get in by, I don't know what it's probably like 5 o'clock by June 15th. And then we will approve the MPO guidelines at the June commission meeting. Next. Staff recommendations will be posted for the statewide small urban rural and quick build programs on October 21st. That is just staff recommendations. That's not the official program. That does not happen until the commission adopts the program, which will be at the December 7th and 8th commission meeting. And then the program, the projects that were not selected out of the state program that are located within one of the 10 large MPOs, the MPOs can start their selection process. And then the MPO recommended projects will be posted in mid-May, and then we'll adopt the MPO component in June 2023. And then that's when we consider this cycle officially all programmed. Next. Okay, I am going to turn over to Beverly to give a workshop recap, but I'm sure I'll be stepping in here and there. So go ahead, Beverly.
Thanks, Lori. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to walk through the things that we finalized at the January 11th workshop, which was last week. So next slide, please. So the first thing that we finalized was the housing language. So we've been talking about this over a few workshops. I think we've done kind of 3 discussions on this topic this cycle. And just as a reminder, kind of the purpose of adding this language is to really expand on the housing language that's already in the application, to kind of build on it and to really just recognize the state's housing goals and enhance the link between active transportation and housing. So this language will be added to the transformative projects question. Well, sorry, the language in the question will be a little bit different, but this applies to the transformative projects question, which is in the large application only. And at the application workshop, at our next workshop, we'll talk more about specifically how this will be integrated into the application. But the language that the group decided on, I'll go ahead and read it for everyone out loud. So it's in bold underlined text on the screen, the additional language. So the language reads, in addition, applicants should address the potential for the project to support existing and planned housing, especially affordable housing, and how the project will advance local transportation and land use goals. Applicants are encouraged to apply for the California Department of Housing and Community Development's Pro-Housing Designation Program and to describe how local policies align with pro-housing criteria. If housing is not an issue for the community, the applicant should explain why it is not a concern. So again, this is really just expanding on the affordable housing and housing language that we already have in the application. And we worked with HCD and this group on this language and incorporated your feedback. So we can open it up for any final comments on this language. So I will check and see if there's anything, any comments out there waiting.
Thank you, Beverly. Giving it a few seconds. The only questions we've received so far are just asking if the PowerPoint will be available following the meeting.
Yeah, so we post the presentation and a recording of the webinar after the meeting. It usually takes a couple days, but yes, it will be available.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any other comments at this time.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, we can move on to the next topic.
Beverly,
yeah.
When it's a good time for you, can you explain how the guidelines are posted on the commission's website for the commission meeting, so everybody, if anybody wants to see them all together, that's how they can see them?
Yeah, sure. I can go over that before we go into leveraging. So the meeting book for the upcoming January commission meeting was posted last week, last Friday, I believe. So you can go onto our website, and if you click on the agenda for the meeting, I forget which item number it is, but you'll be able to find, it's the presentation of the draft 2023 Active Transportation Program Guidelines. So if you click on that item, you go to, it's our book item, like the staff report on it. And from there, attached to that book item is a clean version of the draft guidelines. So you won't be able to see any changes on that version. It'll just be kind of what it would look like once it's finalized. But we do have linked within the book item a tracked changes version of the guidelines as well, that's in comparison to the 2021 guidelines. So there you can see the actual changes. And some of the changes they're all in bold, underlined. Some of them are in italics. The ones that are in italics are ones that we're actually talking about today in this workshop because they hadn't been finalized with the group yet. So if you have any questions about that, you can either ask here or you can just send me an email and I'm happy to help. Okay, so leveraging. So as we mentioned on our last workshop, we are recommending that we continue to score on leveraging in medium and large applications as we did last cycle. And we're not going to be recommending any additional leveraging sources at this time. And so it's part of our goal to try to keep this as consistent with last cycle as possible. But again, in the future, we can explore these questions again. So I will see if there are any comments or questions with Justin.
Thank you, Beverly. Giving it a few seconds. Not seeing any attendees indicating they wish to make comment at this time.
Great, thank you so much, Justin. We can go to the next slide. All right, so another topic that we settled last week was the discussion around the potential non-infrastructure set aside. So commission staff, again, we're not recommending a non-infrastructure set aside in the 2023 program. And just to make sure there's no confusion about that, these projects are definitely still eligible. There will still be an application for them. It just means that they'll still be considered alongside other project types in our project selection process. And during our discussion of this item a couple workshops ago, we really heard from stakeholders just how critical these projects are, and we completely agree. And kind of in recognition of just the importance of these projects and how critical they are to supporting active transportation, we are recommending that we remove the prioritization of infrastructure projects and the tiebreaker for projects at the cutoff score. So currently, infrastructure projects are prioritized over non-infrastructure when we're trying to determine which projects to fund at the cutoff score because of funding limitations. So this would remove that that part of the tiebreaker so that non-infrastructure projects are given equal consideration. And it looks like we do have a comment, so I will hand things over to Justin.
Thank you, Beverly. Yes, we did receive one written comment at this time. It comes from Lindell Price. They ask, will the application call for a map that shows the location of housing referenced in the application in relation to the proposed project? Thank you.
It doesn't currently. In that question, you can attach different supporting documentation, so that could potentially be something you attach. I will say that this is something we'll discuss at the application workshop. We'll go specifically into like application questions and required attachments. Anything else, Justin?
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing anything else at this time.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. All right, so another topic that we've discussed a couple times with the group is the issue of enforcement activities within non-infrastructure projects. So at the last workshop, Emily Abrahams from Caltrans and from the Active Transportation Resource Center kind of gave an overview of what we currently fund in terms of enforcement and kind of our strategy and ATRC strategy moving forward. So per her presentation, we're going to be de-emphasizing enforcement within the guidelines and really focusing more on the kind of reframing them in the context of the education and encouragement opportunities that they provide. So as Emily mentioned, the activities that we currently fund are generally like school crossing guard trainings and like student and parent ambassadors for safety, like those types of programs, and rewards for good behavior. So these types of activities will still be eligible. We're kind of reframing it, and the ATRC is also going to develop some additional resources and guidance for applicants about these types of projects, just helping ensure that equity is integrated into these projects. So there's actually another slide on this later on in the presentation, kind of some of the language that will be changing in the guidelines. But I will see if Justin has anyone with questions or comments at this point.
Thank you, Beverly. Yes, we did receive one additional written comment. It comes from Tony Potter. They ask, some more will come on the housing. I know currently with HCD, we have to have a zone of influence of so many miles.
So with the housing, we're not requiring that you apply for the pro-housing designation. We are encouraging you to do it because we know that as part of some recent legislation and as part of CAPDI, HCD is supposed to be kind of promoting that program and integrating, working with other state agencies to integrate that program into different funding programs. So it's something that we may require or we may score on in the future, but we're not scoring on it this cycle. So we're not requiring like a zone of influence or anything. We basically want, as with most things in our application, we really want you like a narrative on like how the project is advancing housing. So if you can convince us that the project is going to impact certain housing developments, then that's really what we're looking for. We don't have a specific zone of influence for it. Hopefully that answers the question. Feel free to put in the chat if it doesn't, or if you want to and raise your hand and clarify, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Beverly. I will let you know if they do respond. We have received a few more written comments during this time. The next comes from Lindell Price. They ask, in earlier rounds, the format of the application was very infrastructure oriented. Has the application format been made appropriate for non-infrastructure as well as for infrastructure projects?
So the non-infrastructure projects, standalone projects have their own application now. So different project types have their own application. So we have small, medium, and large infrastructure, non-infrastructure only, and plans. So I would say the non-infrastructure application is very tailored to non-infrastructure projects. Applicants can also apply for combination projects that are infrastructure and non-infrastructure. And in those, we do have prompts that ask applicants to talk about their non-infrastructure projects. At the application workshop, that's something we also want to look at with everyone to kind of refine that language and make sure that applicants are really given the opportunity to show off and talk about their non-infrastructure projects that are part of a combination project.
Hey, Beverly, I just want to add to that we're finalizing guideline language in this workshop, and our next workshop is going to focus on the application. So some of these questions are very application focused. So we have a lot to get through. So remember that this is for guidelines language, not specifically on the application. Not you, Beverly, I mean everyone else.
I know, thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. I'll go through what we have at this time. Lindell responded by saying, thank you. Separate applications for different types of projects is an excellent improvement. A follow-up from Tony Potter. So it wouldn't be how a particular project assists with current low-income housing, say completes or improves a bus route or say a sidewalk to a transit station, but rather how it would possibly create new housing. That was Tony Potter's follow-up on the housing question.
Yeah, so that's something you can definitely talk about in your narrative. And when we go through the applications next week, the next workshop, I'm sorry. I think you'll see how open-ended the questions are. And so it really gives like applicants space to describe like how these different issues and policies apply to the context of their community. So we definitely keep everything open-ended, so there's flexibility because there's just so many different contexts within the state, you know, urban versus rural and the size of communities and everything like that. So it's pretty open-ended.
Thank you, Beverly. couple more from Lupe Camacho. They ask, how in the context of education and encouragement will these activities be reframed? And they followed up with, will there be community engagement and community education and engagement and participation be enforced?
So we have an example later on in the presentation of how we're reframing it, and the guidance that the ATRC will be developing will kind of go along the lines of community participation and making sure that these are focused on building kind of positive community partnerships. If law enforcement is involved, really making sure that there's a positive relationship between the community and law enforcement. And so hopefully that answers your question. And I'm not sure if Emily from Caltrans is on the call today. If she wants, she can come off or raise her hand and come off mute to respond to that further. Or we can also follow up with you with more information as well.
Thank you, Beverly. I'm not seeing any other attendees with a response or looking to make further comment at this time. I do not see any hand raised from Emily or anybody else at this time.
Great, thank you so much, Justin. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so at the last workshop, the group discussed changing the project size thresholds, and this is something we've heard pretty much universally from from the agencies on this call, just the need to raise these thresholds because of increasing project costs. So on this screen are the thresholds that the group kind of recommended. There were some other recommendations, like there was a lot of support for these recommendations. There was also a recommendation to increase it by 25%, which would be a little less than what's on the screen. I think with 25%, it would be small would be 2.5 million or less, medium would be over 2.5 million and up to 8.75 million, and then large would be over 8.75 million. So this again has an impact on the application that applicants fill out. They're applying for an infrastructure project, and it does also have an impact on applicants applying for pre-construction only for a large. So because we're raising the threshold, applicants who are applying for pre-construction only that application may be ineligible if their total project cost is not over 10 million now. And I'm sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. These thresholds are based on total project costs, not on ATP requests. So this is what we're proposing to move forward with. We'll open it up for any comments or any more discussion on these thresholds now. So I'll hand it over to Justin.
Thank you, Beverly. Just going to give it a few seconds. Not seeing any attendees looking to make comment at this time.
Great. Thanks, Justin. We can go to the next topic. So this language we talked about in the last workshop, and this is just adding language to the MPO project selection section about MPOs being able to allow applicants to downscope their projects or to provide a scalability plan for projects that were statewide submitted but are now being considered in their regional component. So I will open that up for any questions or comments on this.
Thank you, Beverly. Received one comment at this time from Lupe Camacho, just stating, small jurisdictions have difficulty with pre-construction cost covering. Not seeing any other comments at this time.
Okay, thanks, Justin. So just as a reminder, with the ATP, you can apply for all phases, like all pre-construction phases. So environmental through construction. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is one part of the changes we are proposing for the scope change section. So this part of it, we're really just adding a few additional items that should be submitted as part of a scope change package. The first bullet there is really just asking for an explanation if they're changing the scope because something has already been built or will be built through another project, just kind of an explanation of why they're building it through the other project. And then the next bullet is just asking for some, just for them to list any additional funding sources that are being used to complete the project that weren't included in the project application. And then just the identification of any savings that could happen because of the reduced or modified scope. So I will open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. At this time, I don't see anybody with their hand raised, and I don't see any written comments that have been submitted as of yet.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. All right, so that was a recap of what we discussed in the last workshop. And now we're going to move on to some other things that we discussed in the last workshop that weren't quite finalized. So we're hoping to finalize them today. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the project cancellation section, and it seems at the last workshop that everyone was okay with this language. We did change it a little bit, just in consultation with Caltrans. This is really like an implementation issue, but anyway, we worked with Caltrans a little bit on this language, so we changed it so to indicate that the agency must submit a cancellation letter to Caltrans when they intend to cancel a project, and then clarified that project cancellations in the PA&ED, PS&E, and right-of-way phases require repayment of reimbursed ATP funds if the investment does not result in a physical improvement within 10 years. And then the final thing that we kind of clarified here was that if the project is federally funded, then Caltrans needs to obtain FHWA concurrence if the agency intends to cancel the project. So we'll open this up for any questions, and if there are technical questions, we may have to get a little bit of help from our colleagues at Caltrans.
Thank you, Beverly. Giving the system a few seconds to acknowledge anybody who might be trying to comment. At this time, I don't see any hand raises or any written comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. And obviously, people can raise their hands or add comments if they think of something as we go along. So we will still have time to address comments. Okay, so this is the project segmenting section that we're adding. And again, kind of our goal with this is to help agencies deliver projects, especially complicated projects that may have different issues. So just as a reminder, reprogramming is not allowed in ATP. So as part of this, every project phase must remain programmed in the fiscal year that it was originally programmed. And what we mean by that is if you segment the portion that's segmented, you will be able to request like a separate time extension for the segmented section. So the thing that we added to this language after consulting with Caltrans and internally, and after a question that we got from the group last time, is in bold underline on the screen. And it basically is just that segmenting must be approved before construction allocation, and then any phase that's already been allocated cannot be segmented. So everything else on there is still the same, and I will hand it over to Justin to see if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Corey Wilkerson. Corey, you are now unmuted and free to comment.
So is that language totally necessary? Is there any way around that? Can we not include that language?
Yes, it's necessary. Why? Corey, I don't understand the question.
If a local agency comes across something that during their construction phase that is preventing them from being able to construct the project in the manner that it was originally designed.
No, this is the language that is in the other programs. It's in the language that's in the STIB that we discussed this thoroughly with our management, and there's no segmenting after construction allocation. If they're segmenting would typically, it should become apparent that it's necessary in the right away or design phases.
I mean, hopefully, yeah, I agree. I thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Lori and Corey.
We do have a couple more attendees. Sorry, Beverly. We do have a couple more attendees with their hand raised at this time. Up next, we have Heather Miller.
Sorry, am I still muted or?
You are unmuted. We can hear you, Heather.
I'm a little unfamiliar with the project segmenting. Sounds like this was allowed prior. This applies to projects that have been approved in the last cycles, or this new language applies to projects approved in the new cycle 6 and moving forward?
So this will apply to any project. So you could do it on previous projects as long as it fits these requirements. So this is a completely new section that we're adding. So this wasn't included previously. And sorry, that one bullet point that's bold underline, that was added since we last presented this language to everyone. And that was kind of an issue that was brought up during that workshop. So it would apply to any project.
Okay.
We do have one more attendee with their hand raised at this time. Up next, we have Lupe Camacho.
Good morning, or yeah, I guess it still would be good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. I just wanted to bring to the table, I understand that this new bullet point has been added and that management has considered it heavily as to whether to allow a phase that has already been allocated for construction to be segmented after it's been allocated. I want to bring to the table that a lot of the older cities, and I have quite a bit of experience working for older cities, it is sometimes when you put the shovel to the ground, you don't really know what you're going to hit. records are scarce and sparse because of the age of the city and because of obviously retention of the data and the information. You know, digitally now we're getting a lot better at it, but in the olden days it was not as easy to have that information accessible, and in transferring a lot of it unfortunately gets lost or mishandled. And so I just, again, I am looking at it from the point of view of an older city, which is usually the cities that really do need the active transportation. That would benefit a great deal from the active transportation, because they tend to be the ones that are built out and or have been around for a long time. And those cities, we tend to run into things in construction. And I think that's what the gentleman before me was trying to get at, is that is there a way to modify this to maybe give some leeway for situations such as that, where, you know, you're in a very old city and you're hitting things in the ground that you really had never anticipated, and there are no records on, because obviously the records sometimes get misplaced or they get lost. So again, I just wanted to bring that to the table. I've worked for many old cities, and we tend to hit things in the ground that no one had even anticipated, and at times we've needed to segment projects because of those things that we hit, having to abide by other regulations, sometimes even federal regulations, because we hit something in the ground that needs to be protected in place and or assessed or reviewed, or, you know, to that extent. That's why I want to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have Teresa Pavila, our Deputy Director, on, who was going to respond to that comment and to Corey's comment. I don't know, Justin, if you can find her.
Yes, thank you, Beverly. Teresa is now muted and free to comment.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Beverly. You know, we all have to realize that this is a competitive program, and it was the project was selected based on a scope of work, along with a lot of other things, but pretty much the scope of work. The expectation is for the scope of work to be, excuse me, to be completed as indicated in their application. Now, although we do sympathize with a lot of the smaller agencies or cities, just like the previous caller talked about, they still, however, have to deliver the project as it was scoped, as it was evaluated and selected. If for some reason a portion of the scope is no longer viable, then we have a bigger problem besides the segmenting that we need to deal with. So so that will be dealt separately, meaning should the project be still programmed at all in the ATP. And we do have a process to evaluate a significant scope change if that does occur. So I think that is one of the reasons why we're making it very clear how we're going to be proceeding with segmenting. Now, we've done segmenting in the past, and we follow this process. We're just documenting the process, and it is a process that we are applying to all our programs, and it's just being documented, formalized in guidelines. When in the past we had we were silent on this section, but we found that it was becoming more common because, as you know, a project from the time it is planned to the actually going through the environmental process, through the design process right away, it does change, and there's certain conditions that must be addressed, and this provides that flexibility. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, Teresa. Any other comments, Justin? Oh, here comes Larry.
I will just say that was Teresa's 2 cents, but it's an important one because she's the boss. So thanks, Teresa.
Beverly, yes, we so a response from Lupe was that she stated, I was not referring to absolute scope change, just segmenting in the case of unforeseen field circumstances.
I think, Yeah, you know, that is the reason why reporting it is so important, because as you report, you start looking at how your project is being evaluated. I think it would be important for you, if there is a situation where that occurs at time of construction, for us to kind of either, through the reporting process and contacting the commission as to what the situation is, because it will be very, very difficult for us to segment a project after construction. I mean, I'm not sure how large, I'm sure there's very large infrastructure projects in the active transportation program. And, but we have to really draw the line. Again, we have to remember, this is a competitive program. And we made certain, the agency that was awarded the funds made commitments, and we're holding them to those commitments. So, but we're always available to have a discussion on things that are really out of the ordinary or extraordinary that normally they're not. Most of the things we've heard are, part of the delivery process. So that's what I would respond to that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the same thing, Teresa. Lupe, if our guidelines cover, they're intended to cover like 99% of what's happening. We do have odd situations that come up, and then sometimes we just have to deal with those. So if something comes up where a project, it's in construction and something happens, then we'll talk about that at the time. But we need to have guidelines to cover, the vast majority of what happens in the program.
Thanks, Lori and Teresa. And yeah, I agree. We have odd things that come up, and we, in partnership with Caltrans, we work with agencies on the issues. And so if something extraordinary comes up, we would work with the agency. Anything else, Justin?
Yes, Beverly, we did receive a couple more written comments during this time. The first comes from Rachel Marconi. They write, "We appreciate the CTC's recognition that projects may need to be segmented sometimes. It would be really helpful if the first bullet was modified to read, quote, if segmented project implementation is unavoidable, CTC may consider programming subsequent work in a future fiscal year in a case-by-case basis," end quote. Goes on to say, given that some of the segmenting is because of unavoidable issues such as environmental mitigation, right-of-way challenges on one area, it might make sense to allow landscaping or certain elements to be implemented in a fewer separate contract, second section, or other final items to happen in a future fiscal year. Thank you.
So Lori and Teresa might want to chime in on that one as well.
After Beverly, let me just go take a shot at this one. We talked about this at the last workshop, and again, this is a competitive program. The project was selected based on the deliverability as well. So remaining it in the fiscal year that it was committed to is of most importance to us, especially on this program that is so oversubscribed. We do have time extensions for that reason, and so it would be problematic if we are to start moving fiscal years around and reprogramming the segments of the project. That will be problematic for the program.
Thanks, Teresa. And that's what the kind of the purpose of why we're adding this language is to allow agencies to segment, and then they can, proceed with part of the project, but kind of go through the time extension process for other parts of the project where they're seeing issues. So our intent is kind of to let agencies use that time extension process if they need additional time for a portion of the project.
We did receive one additional comment during this time from Paul Gergeis. They ask, could the line be added, quote, unexpected changes in scoping should be brought to blank, quote. That way it reminds people of the process available for evaluation.
I don't entirely understand the question. For context, I don't know if they want to come off mute and ask. For context, this section is in the same section as the scope change section, or it's a project amendment section in the guidelines, and this is a subsection of that, and scope changes are kind of directly above it, and that explains the scope change process. But if that person wants to raise their hand and come off mute, and they can explain their question more.
Thank you, Beverly. Yes, Paul has raised his hand. You are now off mute and free to comment, Paul. Thank you.
Howdy, y'all. I was just trying to bring up the point. It sounded like people were worried that there wasn't a safety net for unexpected situations. So I was suggesting, but it sounds like you guys already have the process for a safety net listed before. So I just wanted to put focus on that area. That's all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so that's actually a good thing to bring up. Like, this is, again, part of the project amendment section of the guidelines. So in this section, if you look at our draft guidelines that are posted, it has scope changes, and then it has funding distribution changes, and it has this new subsection project segmenting. So it kind of outlines the process for each of these three amendments, and the process for each is pretty similar. Lori?
Yeah, and I just want to remind everybody that we have revised and adjusted the program every cycle to try to help with project delivery. And as the projects have maybe gotten larger and more complicated, we've had things like scope changes, project segmenting to help the implementers to deliver the project, because that's what we want. But I want to emphasize what Teresa said, though. This is a competitive program, and you know, we're always walking that fine line of getting the project delivered, but we need to get the project that was submitted and evaluated and scored. So you know, we are doing what we can to help project delivery, but with the understanding that that is, you know, one of our main roles is to ensure that the projects are delivered as submitted and scored. Thanks, Beverly.
Thanks, Lori. Any other comments, Justin?
Beverly, I'm not seeing any other comments or hands raised at this time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. All right, speaking of scope amendments, as I mentioned before, a few slides ago, there was some changes to the kind of some of the document or some of the items that we were requesting as part of a scope change request. And we presented this language last time to the group, basically clarifying that retroactive scope changes are not allowed, and we need scope changes before construction scope changes requested to be approved before construction allocation is requested. The language in bold underline that's added here is an oversight that we had when we first presented this language, because scope changes after construction allocation are allowed in our guidelines in section 36 in an instance where cost savings is found at contract award. So agencies are allowed to expand their scope if they have cost savings at contract award. So I will open this section up for discussion.
Thank you, Beverly. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Carl Anderson.
Hi, Beverly. Thank you for the presentation today. MTC is supportive of the last section about project segmenting, but do have some concerns about this section. And I would advocate, in the interest of flexibility, that we allow minor scope changes after con allocation, as opposed to just a carte blanche, not allowing any at all. I can understand the intent of not wanting to shift, the project or revise the project in a major way where benefits being lost. But I think there are instances where a project can change post-con allocation, but the benefit is still being maintained and only minor changes are being revised on the project. So that's our comment.
Can you give an example of that, Carl?
Well, most recently, the one that we're going through right now, City of SFMTA has had a lot of kind of delivery issues during COVID with increased project costs. So what they did is they streamlined some of their delivery, and they they removed some of the project elements and are constructing those project elements as a part of a different project. So that, of course, would trigger a scope revision. So the benefit is still being maintained, but the specific project elements are changing, but they'll still be delivered. And so that's an instance where that could pop up in the future.
I would hope that that would lead to cost savings, as explained in the underlined section.
That's just not the reality for cities right now. They're constructing during COVID. I mean, yes, we would all hope for that, but that's just not what's going on. And so that's what they're
I don't understand. So they're not doing some of the scope, and there's not cost savings?
That's correct. Yeah.
Can I?
Some of the scope is going to a different project, but still being delivered in the same time frame.
Yeah. So the expectation, Carl, is for this, in this particular example that you provided, it's kind of not a minor scope change. It's a significant change in the deliverability of the project, and it goes back. It's tied back to the segmenting. Prior to allocation, you would definitely know whether or not you had enough funding to fully construct the project, because the expectation is that when the project comes forward for an allocation, is a fully funded project with the scope identified. Yep. If at that time you make a determination that because of the funding constraints, a portion of the scope is not going to be delivered in this contract, then you would definitely ask for a segmented project, which means that now you're going to have two project scopes, with the other project being delivered at the same time or later on, but it will be funded through with another fund source. But it will be identified prior to allocation. That is the expectation. If that is not happening, then that's problematic, because we expect that when an allocation comes forward, it is a fully funded project.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but the project segmenting rules would only apply if the project is being split into two and utilizing both segments is utilizing the ATP funds.
Not necessarily.
Under the current guidelines, it is allowed for other concurrent projects to pick up ATP scope under a scope change.
Yeah, it is
with a different fund source.
Yeah, not necessarily. If you are segmenting a project, even if it does not have ATP funding on a particular segment, it will still be part of an ATP program. We will still be monitoring that other segment that does not have any ATP funds, because the scope of work is still part of the ATP program. So we can definitely segment a project without any ATP funds on it, and but you will have to report on that other segment because it's part of the scope of the program. Otherwise, like Lori said, with the expectation would be is for us to determine what that scope of work that was removed, and identify the savings to the program. And it sounds like that's not the case.
Yeah, and I understand, and I just also want to reiterate, that's one example or one instance where an agency might encounter potential scope revision at post-con allocation. Going back to what one of the other speakers said earlier, like they said, they may discover something drastic after they actually put a shovel into the ground. I mean, maybe there is a way to accommodate some of those changes that could be minor, and it may not trigger a major scope change. And so I just would hope to see that added flexibility is added to this section.
Okay, we can think about that, but I think, like we said earlier, if there are significant issues, I think it needs to be reported, it needs to be communicated, and as you know, we cannot anticipate every single scenario in guidelines, okay?
Yes.
And there's always an exception to the rule, and we're always willing to look into it and see if it merits a different action. But for the time being, I think based on the experience and the trajectory we've had with the program, putting these adding this additional provisions, it will be useful.
Great, thank you.
Justin, I believe we have some more comments.
Yes, thank you, Beverly. We have a few more attendees with their hands raised and a couple written comments are received during this time. First, from Lupe Camacho, they state, I would also like to see that flexibility be added. From Graham Wadsworth, they ask, is the concern about scope amendments because of the need to reevaluate NEPA and CEQA documents? Would it be okay if the local agency pays for a cost increase?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's our expectation actually. If there's a cost increase, then it's the responsibility of the implementing agency to fund that cost increase. The ATP does not fund cost increases.
Thank you, Beverly. We do. Oh, go ahead, Lori.
Justin, I'll let you finish, Justin.
I was just going to announce one more attendee with their hand raised. Should I go ahead and call on them?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
Up next, we have Shelley Kwan. Shelley, you're free to unmute and make your comment.
Hi, good morning. This is Shelley Kwan from LA Metro, and I am looking at section 36 of the guidelines, and it says that the scope change has to be approved before contract award, but here the savings are being realized at contract award. So when we use contract award here, do we mean like the bids are in and we're ready to award to the best bid, but now we have to wait if we want to do a scope change to award the contract? Because we can only get the scope change approved before the award.
Yeah, contract award is when your board approves the award and you're ready to sign that contract with the contractor. That is award. If you open bids, that is not contract award because you have not really, it could be that you've already seen the lowest bid, but you really have not awarded the contract. You have not signed in the dotted line. That is what contract award is.
Okay, so if after we've signed on the dotted line, we've realized there are savings and we want to expand the scope, we can't do so according to section 36 because we've already awarded the contract.
I'm not really sure what section 36 says. So
Shelley, we can go back and look and make sure that the language makes sense here. We can work with our partners at Caltrans to make sure everything is aligned. I don't know, Lori, if you have anything to add.
No, I'm not really sure what she's talking about right now. We'll have to look back at it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure either. And so yeah, we can go back and look at this, and then at one of the future workshops we can address that issue.
Okay, it could be that I'm confusing myself, but I feel like this was discussed in some of the other SB1 program workshops, but it's been so long since those happened that I don't really recall. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Beverly, I want to say people are bringing up that that these, odd things are happening after construction allocation, so they have to do a scope change. I'll tell you, That's not why this is in here. This is in here because there were agencies that were getting their construction allocation and building a project that wasn't what they submitted in their application. That's why this is in here, because we can't have that happening. And that is to maintain the integrity of the program and to protect the agency, because they will get audited. And if it's found out that they did not build the project that they said they were going to build, they have to pay back all of those funds. That's why this is in here. It's not because there are these really odd, unusual things that are happening that have to be dealt with. That's why we have to have this in here. And, you know, if we don't have this in here, it's going to lead to inadvertently undermining the competitive nature of the program that we have got to protect. Okay, Beverly, I'll stop talking now.
Thanks, Lori. Justin, any other comments or questions?
I'm not seeing any other written comments or hands raised at this time.
Okay, great. We can move on to the next topic. All right, so this is the project reporting addition that we're adding, and we talked about this last workshop. Basically, we want agencies to submit photos of their completed projects as part of the reporting process, and this is for many reasons, but it's part of, we're really trying to highlight the benefits of this program to everyone, to legislators, to other decision makers throughout the state. And so these photographs of completed projects are super important for us. They go into our annual report, they're part of presentations, they are shown at commission meetings. And so we just really, we really want to see these completed projects just so we can show everyone all of the great things happening around the state. So at the last meeting, or at the last workshop, we presented some draft language to the group, and people raised concerns about requiring photographs at different stages of the project. So we revised the language to say that implementing agencies must submit photographs of the completed project as part of the completion report. And then photographs of the project should be at least 300 dpi. And then agencies will also be encouraged, but not required, to submit photographs of significant project progress and milestones. And in that, I'm thinking of like ribbon cuttings and things like that. We love seeing pictures of that too, and they're things that we can share with stakeholders as well. So we can open this up for any additional comments or questions on the sections. I will hand things over to Justin.
Beverly, can I chime in real fast? We do encourage photographs because, as you know, we're always trying to find good photos of construction projects or that are either almost there or are there, finished, for our annual report. And so, you know, I know that we are asking for a very high resolution, and for some agencies this may be problematic, but for the agencies that are not, we do encourage you to provide these reports. If you think you're doing a really good project and you've taken really good photographs and it's something that we can feature in our annual report, that would be awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and to add to that, the program, that's, you know, the CTC annual report, but the program itself, we're always trying to come up with ways to highlight projects and to just show the success of our projects across the state. So it's really, these photographs really give the agencies a chance to show off their project. And as with everything, there were some questions at the last workshop about, oh, like, what if this requirement needs to be waived, or what if there's like extenuating circumstances? And just kind of a theme that we've talked about a bit in this workshop today. Of course, like we in Caltrans will work with agencies who, for whatever reason, have difficulty meeting a requirement like this. We can, Justin, are there any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Beverly. We did receive a few written comments during that time from Tony Potter, and I think Teresa kind of touched on this. Why not both before and after pictures like CDBG and HCD?
So we do require before pictures as part of the project application.
Thank you. And the next one comes from Marianne Hernandez. They write, for non-infrastructure projects, I strongly recommend that they have photo release waivers along with photos and progress reports so the ATRC can share them.
Thank you so much, Marianne. So we can go back and look at that. I think that Caltrans already provides that guidance to non-infrastructure projects when they're providing photos, but whether we need to put it here or somewhere else, we'll make sure that that's included. So thank you.
The next comes from Emily Abrams. They write, the ATRC also has a project profiles in which we use the photos for.
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you, Emily. The ATRC puts together these amazing project profiles that we share in our semi-annual report that really just show off the benefits of infrastructure and non-infrastructure projects. And so photos like this can be used for that as well. So those are a great chance to highlight project success around the state.
Thank you, Beverly. I'm not seeing any other written comments or hands raised at this time.
Thanks, Justin. We can go to the next slide. Sorry, I'm just writing something down, that comment that someone made. Okay, so the next topic that we just wanted to give a brief overview of is the disadvantaged community criteria data sets that we'll be using this cycle. So as most people know, there's multiple ways to apply to qualify as a disadvantaged community. There's median household income, there's CalEnviroScreen, there's Healthy Places Index, there's the National School Lunch Program or free or reduced price meals. And then there's regional definitions, other definitions, and then obviously the tribal qualifier where tribal governments get full points for disadvantaged communities. So we just wanted to highlight a few of the data sets that changed and what we're going to be doing with these this cycle. So for median household income, we would be using the, we should be using the 2016 through 2020 American Community Survey for median household income, but unfortunately, because of COVID, the Census Bureau has delayed its release, and the latest update that we saw is that they're delaying it until March. And so we are going to recommend that we proceed with the 2015 through 2019 American Community Survey for median household income for the 2023 cycle. But this is something that we will finalize when we talk about the application as well. So CalEnviroScreen 4.0 was released in October 2021, so we'll be using version 4.0 of CalEnviroScreen. And then, so for the free and reduced price school meals or the National School Lunch Program, we will be recommending that we use the 2020 through 2021 school year. However, there are still a few things that we're looking into with this. We know that the state has its own program now for free school lunches for everyone. And we know that may have impacted the figures for this qualifier. So we've been looking into this with the Department of Education. And then, so we'll kind of get, during the workshop on applications, we can discuss this one further. And then The other qualifiers, Healthy Places Index hasn't changed. And then regional definitions still qualify, and you can still qualify through the other category as well. So we can open this up for questions or comments. I will say that we're not finalizing these ones today because there's still a little bit of things that we need to look into, but I'm happy to take any comments now.
Thank you, Beverly. As we wait for a few more to come in, one written comment was submitted during the transition to this section. Comes from Lindell Price. They ask, you mentioned projects that were not built as approved having to repay the funding. What is the enforcement for projects that are not maintained? For example, failure to maintain vegetation creates a hazard.
I am not sure of the answer of that. I don't know, Lori or anyone from Caltrans, if you know.
I have no idea. That is, you know, during the life of the project, if someone from Caltrans would have to answer that, if they even can.
Not seen anybody yet from Caltrans using the hand raise feature or anything else at this time. Not seeing any other written comments. Lindell followed up by asking to be directed to the draft guidelines. I believe you can find those on the ATP program page on the website.
Yes, we can also follow up with a link to those as well.
Yeah, Beverly already covered that, but we can follow up with a link. And I heard from Caltrans, we don't know on that vegetation question. We can look into it and follow up.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions or comments at this time.
Thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next topic. All right. The text of this one is pretty small, so I apologize. So this is a change to the timely use of funds section. And it's really just a clarification of what we mean, like in the original text by, you know, construction has to commence within 10 years. So this was a clarification that Caltrans wanted to add based on project delivery. And so I will leave this up on the screen and we can see if there's any questions. And again, we may need Caltrans to jump in on this item to answer any more technical questions.
Giving a few seconds for anybody to use the hand raise feature. The last written comment was submitted from Tony Potter. They write, just a comment, I found the CalEnviro screen can favor high-income communities based on certain factors, say an inactive landfill or an older community with more health issues. Not seeing any additional attendees looking to make public comment at this time.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next topic. Okay, so this is the last portion of our workshop today, and there's actually quite a bit to get through, but a lot of it's pretty minor, at least from our perspective. So these are minor language changes. There's also a few minor policy changes in here, or not really policy changes, but things that we want to add to help applicants highlight the different benefits of their project. So when we get to those, we can talk about those. And there's quite a variety of different things in here. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this change is to section 2, the program purpose and goals. And instead of saying that we will consider state goals and provisions set forth in the executive order in 1919, including state housing goals, we say state goals and provisions. Some of that language shouldn't be crossed out. Provisions set forth in the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI. So this aligns with what we've already been talking about in these workshops. CAPTI is really focused on some of the other funding programs. It does talk about ATP specifically providing more funds to the program, and also in the context of housing, which is kind of the purpose of why we're adding that language to the housing section. So we can pause and see if there are any questions and comments on this language change.
Thank you, Beverly. Going to give it a few more seconds to see if anybody chimes in. Not seeing any at this time. Thank you, Beverly. Still seeing no written comments or hand raises at this time.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. And also, just again to clarify, this will be a complete sentence. I realize that I crossed out too much of the language. I should include set forth. And oh, thank you, Alika. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so this is a paragraph that we'll be adding to the funding source section of the guidelines. So this section of the guidelines just gives an outline of where we get our funds for the program, both federal and state funds. And so we expect that the ATP could get a boost in funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. However, we're not sure how much that will actually be, but we wanted to put a placeholder in the guidelines in case there is additional funding. So this is the language we're proposing. And just a few things to highlight in here is that our intent would be to distribute the funds in accordance with the guidelines and with any federal and statutory requirements. And that essentially means, from our perspective, that we would it would go through the normal splits of statewide, small urban and rural, and MPO. And then we would have to comply with any other federal requirements that the federal government gives us. So we can open it up for any questions or comments on this. And just again, as a disclaimer, we're not sure how much funding there will be for this. So that's a question we can't really answer right now.
Thank you, Beverly. We have received a couple written questions during this time. Sure. First comes from Rachel Morconi. They ask, can you remind us what the pre-IIJA and budget surplus estimated available funds are?
Sure. So as with the previous, I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. She's in a different room. I think that we just got our mail delivered. So in the last cycle, we had about $445 million available for the cycle, and we were able to capture some savings as well. So that's usually like our base of how much funding we have available. And then as many people may know, in the governor's budget that was released, there is the proposed $500 million to augment the ATP that was originally proposed last year, but unfortunately fell through. So we still don't know if that money will actually exist. I don't think the earliest we would really know if it goes through is July. And our intent would be most likely to augment cycle 5, so the last cycle, but we're not entirely sure what the requirements will be. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Beverly. The next written question comes from Keith Williams. They ask, supplemental funding would just go to ATP cycle 6, right? Or also cycle 5?
So if we're talking about the IIJA funding, it would be cycle 6 onwards. Lori?
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. At this point, we don't have any supplemental funding. It's just, we will deal with it when we actually have funding. It was just, our executive management just wanted this phrase in there, and I had expected that it would raise questions, but we don't know, until we actually have some funds. I'm really hesitant to say what we are going to do or what we would propose to do, because we would discuss that with our stakeholders and like our usual process.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you, Beverly. I do not see any other written comments or raised hands at this time.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I may be having network issues. It's still showing the same slide for me. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, it might be me. My internet might be lagging. No, you're fine. My thing just said that I have network issues. So if I cut out, Lori or Alika can jump in for me. Okay, so this changes to the leveraging funds section of the guidelines, and it previously said that pre-construction phases funded by the local agency will be considered for leveraging. And in this section, we're just clarifying, the change is just clarifying what we mean by pre-construction phases. So pre-construction phases are PA&ED, PS&E, and right-of-way. So we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Just giving it a few more seconds. Not seeing any attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. It's still really slow for me. Okay. This change is in the eligible project section under infrastructure projects. So this section of the guidelines just talks about the different eligible project types. So infrastructure, non-infrastructure, and plans. And in this section, we're adding to the infrastructure projects description that we expect collaboration and cooperation between the agency and Caltrans for all projects on the state highway system. And this aligns with the language in the current application, and it also aligns with the language and the guidelines for all of the SB1 competitive programs. So we can take any questions or comments on this language now.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any at the moment, but I'll give it a few more seconds. Not seeing any attendees to looking to make comment at this time?
Okay, great. Thanks, Justin. We can go to the next slide. Just have to wait. I think my internet is being really slow. Because it's not, oh, there we go. Okay, so this change is on the project type requirements, which is section 16A. And so this section outlines how to qualify as a disadvantaged community. And this is just the intro paragraph to that section. So in that section, we highlight the different ways that people can, or that communities can qualify, which I outlined before, but just to reiterate, that's median household income, the National School Lunch Program, the CalEnviro Screen, Healthy Places Index, a regional definition, and other definition, or as a tribal community. So this language change that we're putting here is previously this section said that projects must, it's just the introduction paragraphs. It basically is just saying that projects have to benefit low-income people. So we've changed that low-income communities and low-income people to disadvantaged communities in this section, just so everyone's referring to the different criteria, which not all of them are necessarily low income. There's different ways to qualify as a disadvantaged community. So we can take any questions or comments on this change.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any attendees looking to make comment at this time.
Okay, we can move on to the next topic. Okay, so this is section 18 of our guidelines, and it describes our evaluation process. And this is just an addition that we wanted to make. So currently we allow only two evaluators from any one agency to ensure a broad representation of evaluators on our evaluation committee. However, we in the past have really relied on our alternates. So if more than one, we just wanted to clarify in the guidelines that if more than two individuals from an agency would like to be evaluators, we can put them on the alternate list. And if a spot opens up, we'll add more from that agency. So this is just kind of to reflect our current process, and we can take any questions or comments on this language.
Thank you, Beverly. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Lupe Camacho.
Thank you very much. I just have a question regarding the evaluators from the agencies. Will you be allowing for any residents, any just community residents to apply for being evaluators?
So in the past, we have allowed people who I would say are more like community advocates or community activists on active transportation to apply to be evaluators. So I would say they're definitely not excluded. In terms of who is excluded, it's any consultants, so people who would be profiting off of projects. And yeah, so I would say that we would consider a resident who is an advocate or something like that in the community. We just ask that our evaluators be experts in some type of active transportation. You know, we have people from all different perspectives who participate. And so just some sort of expertise in active transportation, whatever expertise that may be. So yeah, so they wouldn't be excluded from consideration.
Beverly, maybe just explain the conflict of interest though.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. Okay, so we do a couple things to make sure there's no conflicts. So first, every evaluator has to sign a conflict of interest form to certify that they can and will evaluate projects in an unbiased manner. And also they have to list any projects that they may have a conflict with. So anything that they may have provided input on or anything that they're working on. So we have the conflict of interest form that evaluators have to sign. And then another thing that we do is that in our guidelines, we say that evaluators cannot evaluate projects from agencies that are within the county or counties that they live or work. So basically anything in your area, either your work area or where you live, you can't evaluate any projects from that county. In practice, we actually were able last cycle to extend that even further. So we, for the most part, did not assign projects to evaluators who lived or worked in the same Caltrans district. So really, they were evaluating projects from a different part of the state. And also, we try to mix up so evaluators are in teams of 2, so we try to get one person from the north, one person from the south on each team. And we also try to diversify the perspectives and the expertise on each evaluator team, although that is never perfect because it's hard like doing that matchmaking, but it's something that we try really hard to do.
Thank you, Beverly. We did receive one additional written comment during this time. It comes from Keith Williams. They ask, will guidance be introduced for non-engineer evaluators on how to appropriately review engineering drawings in the application?
So that's a good question. And I think, Keith, this is something that you brought up in our evaluator debrief. And so what we were thinking of doing is having Caltrans come on either one of our evaluator trainings or doing a separate training and going over their PSR equivalence workshop that they did on December 1st more for applicants, but kind of going through that training with the evaluators to help them understand that section more. And as always, Caltrans will be reviewing that section of the application as well. And we'll talk to evaluators about it.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any written comments or questions or any hands raised at this time.
Great, thank you, Justin. We can move on to the next section. Okay, so this change is basically we're just adding that applicants must discuss any anti-displacement policies or actions to discourage gentrification in the community. And then if displacement is not an issue, they must explain why it is not a concern for the community. So this change is actually not really a change because this was included in the scoring rubrics last year or last cycle and was the intent of adding the anti-displacement language to the program. So this is really just aligning the guidelines with what the scoring rubrics already say and something that we had decided on last cycle. And just to clarify it, because we realized last year or last cycle that it was confusing that the language in the guidelines, or it was missing or didn't exactly match what was in the scoring rubrics. So we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Just giving it a few more seconds. Not seeing any attendees looking or indicating they wish to make public comment at this time.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so This is a small change to the needs section of the guidelines, and this is something that we've worked on with the Department of Aging. After talking to them about their master plan for aging, we realized that older adults were kind of missing from our guidelines and our applications. And we have plenty of applicants who talk about older adults, but we really want to encourage our applicants to address their needs in their application. So we are proposing to add this language to the needs section of the scoring criteria in the guidelines. And then how exactly this will look in the application will depend on our discussion at the next workshop, but we envision this just being something added to the prompt of like different things that the applicants can discuss in their kind of open-ended response. So I'll read the whole thing. The additional text is in bold underlined, so potential for increased walking and bicycling, especially among students, including the identification of walking and bicycling routes to and from schools, transit facilities, healthcare centers, community centers, healthcare facilities, employment centers, and other destinations. And then potential to promote equity of access to shared public infrastructure for people of all ages and varying abilities. And the rest was already there. So we can open this up for any questions or comments on this language.
Thank you, Beverly. We so far have received one written comment at this time from Keith Williams. They comment, excellent addition to meet the active transportation needs for people of all ages. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Keith.
At this time, not seeing any additional written comments or hands raised.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide, which is pretty similar. So this is in addition to the safety question. And again, we worked on this with the Department of Aging. And it's just adding a sentence or a clause to this paragraph about, that I can read the whole thing. Again, the new language is in bold underlined, potential for reducing the number and or rate of risk of pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities and injuries, including the identification of safety hazards for pedestrians and bicyclists. And then the new language is with consideration of safety concerns for students, older adults, and persons with disabilities. And then again, this is just another opportunity for applicants to highlight how they're addressing the specific needs of these populations. So I will see if there's any questions or comments on this.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time.
Okay, great. We can move on to the next topic. All right, so this is the public participation and planning section of the scoring criteria. And as you can see, it's pretty long and it has that new language in there that we talked about for plans. And the only thing new here is that we're asking, just saying project applicants must clearly articulate how the local participation process resulted in the identification of and prioritization of the project. And that's in parentheses, it says, including the participation of disadvantaged community stakeholders, which is already in there. And then we've added community-based organizations. And so we wanted to add this first to encourage applicants to collaborate with community-based organizations, but also to give them, just to remind them to really talk about their work that they've done with community-based organizations. So we can open this section up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Lupe Camacho.
Hi, Beverly. Thanks again for letting me speak. I've got kind of a two-part question. Maybe the second part you may not be able to provide an answer for, but as far as the scoring on this section, I wanted to know how heavily weighed is it going to be as far as the specific stakeholder involvement and engagement that the agency will be implementing? How heavily will that be weighed as far as awarding? And then once awarding occurs, how I guess will it be enforced? If it will be enforced, will there be ramifications with regards to agencies that don't fulfill their plan that they submitted to include and speak to the community and include the community in this engagement process for the project? So as the nice lady before you mentioned, sometimes agencies ended up delivering projects that do not meet, that were not what they got approved for. We've also seen projects that are they're submitted with the plan of engaging the community, but then the engagement only happens with private companies and or private organizations, and the community is left out in the cold with regards to what is going on in their improvements and infrastructure improvements in their community and in their area. So kind of a two-part question, both for awarding as well as after award, the actual enforcement of it. Thank you.
Sure. So for awarding, we don't have like a specific threshold that applicants need to meet. So we recognize that the context of each project is different, the context of each community is different. However, so we'll talk about this more in the scoring rubrics section, or the scoring rubrics workshop and the application workshop. Scoring rubrics are very detailed specifically on this question, and basically what we tell our evaluators is that the public participation should match the magnitude and complexity of the project. So for a larger project, we expect a lot more engagement with the community at every step. For a smaller project, not as much, but obviously we still expect public engagement, and applicants are required to submit documentation of their engagement and provide details. A big part of scoring component of a big part of scoring this is kind of looking to make sure that they made it accessible to their community. So the times of day that they provided, any engagement opportunities, making sure that those were available for people with different needs. If it's, they provided engagement in different languages, items like that. So it's not really possible for me to say exactly what the threshold is for that, but it is something that I would say our evaluators are very good at spotting, like making sure that the community is actually being engaged. And a key component of that is if the project benefits a disadvantaged community, describing how that community was engaged as part of the process. And that's also part of the disadvantaged communities question as well. So I would suggest taking a look at our scoring rubrics for a little bit more detail on how this question is scored. In terms of how the community is engaged during project implementation, so I would say for scope changes, especially major scope changes, we require documentation of additional community engagement. For the rest of that question, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. I don't know, Lori, if you want to come on and address that, kind of the community engagement once the project is being implemented.
So, first of all, what has happened is if there ends up being a major problem with the community when after a project is awarded, we generally hear about it and we follow up. like Beverly said, we ask for a lot of documentation on the public participation in the application. So what happens after project award, we expect that the applicant is continuing to engage with the community, and if the biggest problem would be is if the project is not built as was promised to the community, and we would find that out through the project reporting process or the or through an audit. I will say one thing though, we also recognize that usually 100% of the community is not happy with the project. So we also weigh that into that sometimes there is, you know, a couple people or a segment of the community that doesn't like a project, but if it seems like the community as a whole is supportive, then that's what we're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori. Justin, any other comments or questions?
Beverly, yes, we did receive one additional written question during this time. It comes from Rachel Marconi. She states and then asks, this is a great addition. Does ATRC, CTC, Equity Roundtable, CALSTA, or others have best practices guidance for engaging DACs, students, older adults, people with disabilities, etc.?
Rachel, that's a great question. We can go back with our equity team and see what I think they have things under development and I think the ATRC has items as well. Lori, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. One of the reasons that this came up for anybody that participated in the Active Transportation Symposium, there was a what do you call it, panel, and then it kind of came up throughout about using community-based organizations to help with particularly engaging the community. And we heard some really good presentations on how it has worked out very well. And so we wanted to get that in there, that's great. The reason that we're not, I guess, mandating it in any way is that we also know that not every, it's not always easy, I guess, administratively and bureaucracy-wise to always work with a community-based organization. We actually have these issues ourselves. So we are encouraging it, but know that there are a lot of barriers to doing that. So I think having some kind of guidance or, you know, presentation or best practices or something like that, probably through the ATRC, I think that would be, I think that's a really great idea.
Anything
Okay, Beverly,
else?
not seeing it. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, not seeing any additional comments or questions from any attendees at this time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next topic. Okay, so this addition is on the context-sensitive bikeways and walkways and innovative project elements question. This is in medium and large applications only. And so we are proposing to add, so it currently says the recognized best solutions appropriate for the local community context will be considered. Applicants should discuss how the project advances a lower stress environment or a low stress network. So just to clarify, the application already asks applicants to discuss how the project advances a lower stress environment. And so it didn't say that in the guidelines, but the application already asks that. And then we just added that in. And then we also added a low stress network. And the reason we added that is that we really want applicants to to think about and to highlight the ways in which their projects are linking to a broader network within their community. So that's really just to give them a chance to discuss that, like just basically how maybe it's part of a low stress network, or maybe it kind of links in to a planned network that the community has. So we can open this section up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Beverly. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Dave Campbell.
Hey, this is Dave Campbell with Bike East Bay in Oakland, California. A question about the world-class language that Caltrans has added to the new Complete Street policy, which of course is wonderful to see. It actually appears in several places in the new policy. So, I'm curious, or my question is, how might you be incorporating that world-class language into this particular scoring criteria, maybe as it relates to the word innovative in this criteria? And, do you or will you encourage innovation that incorporates best practices or world-class practices from around the world, not just the United States or North America? Thanks.
So our current language in the guidelines is pretty open-ended when it comes to innovation. So we allow applicants to talk about how something is innovative in their own community, because some communities don't have any infrastructure at all. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know, Lori, if you want to address the world-class language that's in the Complete Streets guidance.
So, Dave, I'm going to have to be just kind of blunt here. There is a big difference between putting language in a document and using it for scoring in a grant application. So we can look at that, but I think right now what we are proposing is this language here. Because we have a lot of applicants from all over the state, and like Beverly said, a lot of times there's absolutely no facilities whatsoever. So I don't know, expecting a world, I don't know what the language was. What was the language, Beverly, that he said?
World class.
World class what? World class?
I'm not sure. I think it's like world-class facilities, like things that are not just innovative here, but also innovative around the world.
Okay, so sometimes there is a community that has absolutely nothing, and what they need is a bike lane. So that may not be world-class, but that's what they need, and that's what's appropriate for the situation. So that would be our expectation. If it is appropriate that they put in a world-class type of facility, then that is what's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that applicants who are putting in facilities like that are really highlighting it. We saw some in cycle 5 where they were putting in some really innovative things like protected intersections, kind of the Dutch style intersections, and more class 4 bikeways that use innovative features. So really this question, we're kind of making sure that there's room for whatever the context of that community is. So Justin, are there any more questions or comments?
Yes, Beverly, thank you. We did receive a couple written comments during this time. The first comes from Lucy Cardenas. They write, rural cities don't have very much, so world-class would be impossible to meet. From Keith Williams, they write, fabulous. I fully support emphasizing how a project creates, extends, or fills gaps in a low-stress network here and the application. Thank you. And that completes all written submissions, and I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next topic. Okay, so this is the transformative project question. So this is where we're also adding that housing language that we discussed at the beginning of the workshop. And just to reiterate, this applies to large projects only. So currently in the application, we already ask applicants to describe how nearby projects and local policies contribute to the project's transformative nature. So that wasn't in the guidelines, but it was in the application. So we're just putting it in the guidelines to highlight that. And we also added ordinances. So it's now we'll say applicants should describe how nearby projects and local policies and ordinances will contribute to the project's transformative nature. So again, we wanted to highlight the nearby projects and local policies language that's already in the application. And then with local ordinances, we really just wanted to add this to give, to prompt applicants to talk about any local ordinances that they may have that are supportive of active transportation. So when we think of local ordinances, things like bike parking ordinances, like new buildings have to have bike parking or a certain amount of bike parking, or things like developers including biking and walking facilities. There's no real, we don't want to define what exactly we mean by that because it could look different in each community. So yeah, we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any at this time. Going to give it a few more seconds, though.
Thanks, Justin.
We received one written submission from Keith Williams. They ask, would you consider policies, quote unquote, or ordinances instead of and?
Yeah, we can consider that. I'm not sure how much it matters in the guidelines because in the application, how it's kind of laid out now is that it's a bulleted list of different things that applicants can address or should think about while they're answering the question. So I'm not sure how much it matters in terms of what's in the guidelines, but we can look at that.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any additional written comments or hands raised at this time.
Yeah, Beverly, I agree. We can look at it, but I don't think it's going to make a difference. We'd have to look at the actual scoring rubrics, but I don't think it's going to matter.
Yeah, I think it will matter more for the scoring rubrics in the application discussion. And in this context, I don't think it really matters. Thanks, Lori. Okay, we can move on to the next topic. Okay, past performance. So this is something that we score on, and we are adding, so previously it just said non-use of the Conservation Corps as committed in a past ATP award, and then or failure of any past ATP project. So we're proposing to add adverse audit findings on a past ATP project that are the fault of the applicant. So we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any at the moment, but I'm going to give it a few more seconds.
Thanks, Justin.
Not seeing any attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so this addition, it's to the MPO supplemental call for project section, talking about, it already says that MPOs must submit their applications that they had through a regional call for projects to the commission in order for us to review them. And so we just added that commission staff and Caltrans staff will review all the applications for eligibility and deliverability. The reason we're adding this language is this is something we already do in collaboration with the MPOs, and we're essentially just adding it as a reminder that to submit them and why we need them, and also it's so we can work through any issues before we actually go to the commission with our staff recommendations. And so we don't have to delay the adoption of any MPO components because there are issues with projects. So we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any written questions or comments at this time.
Great, thanks, Justin. We can move on to the next topic. All right, so this is for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Benefits Calculator. So this is one of the ways that we collect performance metrics on our projects. And if you're an implementing agency, after we programmed your projects for Cycle 5, if you received a Cycle 5 award, you probably got an email for us asking for this information. So basically, we ask for successful projects, different data points, and then we plug them into this calculator, and then we do kind of a roll-up of program benefits. So we're just adding the language that successful applicants, including MPO selected projects, must submit the relevant data to the commission or Caltrans staff within 6 months of programming. And this is just to reiterate that this is a requirement of all successful projects. And so we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Not yet seeing any attendees with their hands raised or any written submissions at this time.
Okay, we can move on to the next topic. All right, so this change was just to clarify state-only funding and the fact that it's not actually designated as state-only funding at programming. It's basically just saying that anything with construction values over $1 million must maintain federal aid eligibility. So this doesn't change the fact that MPOs are designating their federal and state funds when they submit their programming sheets for their regional components. This is just really an administrative language change to clarify this section. And if there's technical questions about this, we may need to have someone from Caltrans jump in. So I will see if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Giving it a few seconds, but still not seeing any attendees looking to make public comment at this time.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a change to the baseline agreement section of the guidelines, and this change is just to align the guidelines with the SB1 accountability and transparency guidelines. So we're just adding that if basically large infrastructure projects that are programmed with ATP funds for pre-construction phases only that meet either the ATP programming amount or the total project cost must submit a baseline agreement. So we can take any questions or comments on this.
Thank you, Beverly. Not yet seeing any attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So this is just a list of the documents that need to be included in a complete baseline agreement package. And this is really just, these are already required currently. It's really just so it's upfront and in the guidelines for everyone so they know what they have to submit. So we can take any questions or comments on this language as well.
Thank you, Beverly. Not seeing any attendees looking to make public comment at this time.
All right, we can move on to the next slide.
Beverly?
Oh, I'm sorry. We can go back. Sorry. Go ahead,
No
Justin.
problem. Yeah, just thought I'd sneak this one in. Just a written question submitted from, it's a general question. They ask, will the funds be allocated to academic institutions through Transportation Institute, or will there be RFPs for a single PI?
I don't know. That is a question that it might be best to email us so we can look into it. Unless Lori, you know, right off the bat.
I have no clue what that question was asking.
Okay.
The person is going to have to come off mute or send us an email because I don't think it has to do with baseline agreements.
Yeah, if they want to come off mute and ask us, that's great. Or they can email us as well, and we can respond.
Not seeing any response at this time.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye out on our inboxes for that question. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so there's a section in the guidelines that outlines how transfers to the Federal Transit Administration work, and there's currently nothing in the guidelines about how the transfers to the Bureau of Indian Affairs works. So we're basically adding the BIA to that section, kind of just outlining how agencies request that kind of transfer and the different requirements. And it's the same process as the FTA transfer. So we can open this one up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Just giving it a few more seconds. Not yet seeing any attendees looking to make public comment at this time.
Also, one thing that I should have mentioned is that we recognize like the challenges with projects that are on tribal lands. We do have some, and there have been issues, and we've been trying to work through these issues, and we'll continue to do so. So that's just an added comment. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, and then this slide, this language is just adding to that FTA transfer, or the reporting section, that any projects with a BIA or FTA transfer must comply with any reporting requirements set forth by the BIA or FTA. It's essentially, we're just saying that the BIA or FTA may have additional reporting requirements that the agencies must comply with. So let's see, we'll see if there's any questions or comments on this language.
Thank you, Beverly. Not yet seeing any attendees looking to make public comment.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, we're in the home stretch these changes. So this is in the project example section of the guidelines. And so there's lots of different project examples in the guidelines, and these are just 3 new ones. But if you go in there and you look, there are lots of different examples of different projects. And we wanted to add a few different examples just based on recent conversations that we've had and recent priorities that we've heard come up. So the first is kind of in alignment with some of the changes we made to the scoring criteria in terms of focusing on older adults. So we added safe routes for senior projects that increase walking and biking among older adults and create routes that connect to activities that improve quality of life. We also added bicycle highways that provide fast direct connections between major destinations. So these were, again, already eligible projects, but it's a conversation or the topic that's been raised by some stakeholders and by some decision makers. So we just wanted to highlight that these are already eligible. And then again, complete low stress active transportation networks. We added that as well. And again, those were already eligible, but it's something that's been coming up. So we wanted to highlight that those were eligible as well. So there's lots of different project examples again, and the examples don't necessarily talk about every single eligible project. They're just examples. So we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Beverly. Not yet seeing any attendees looking to make public comment at this time.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is the change in some of the enforcement language in the guidelines. So in the project examples question or project examples section, we're changing it to emphasize building community partnerships that emphasize activities directly related to improving pedestrian and bicyclist safety. So again, that's kind of part of de-emphasizing and reframing enforcement. And then in Appendix A, subsection G, which is on plan projects, for the non-infrastructure description, we're saying a description of existing and proposed bicycle and pedestrian education and encouragement programs conducted in the area within the plan. So basically, just de-emphasizing the enforcement component of that. But again, those will still be eligible, and the ATRC will have some additional guidance on ensuring that enforcement efforts are kind of just building these positive relationships within the community and with law enforcement. Any questions or comments on this language?
Beverly, I'm not yet seeing any written comments or attendees with their hand raised at this time.
Okay, well, I think we can move on to the next slide, which I believe is the slide about wrapping up. Yep, it is. So I will hand things back over to Lori and possibly Alika, who I think is going to do the action items. But I think Lori is going to lead the wrap up first.
Yeah, actually, I think I will see if what Alika captured for action items, and then I'll make a couple comments.
Okay, great. So just as I typically state with the prior workshops, I'll read off the action items that I was able to document. If there's anything that I missed, please feel free to stop and let me know before the end of this workshop, or shoot me an email. So the first action item is to review section 36 of the guidelines with Caltrans to ensure consistency with the scope amendment section. Next, we have we'll look into including language to the project reporting section regarding photo release waivers so that the ATRC can also use those photos. And then the next item I have is working with Caltrans and looking into enforcement for projects, and someone had mentioned failure to maintain vegetation. So we'll work with Caltrans on that. Let's see, we will circle back with our equity roundtable for a best practices or guidance for engaging communities, whether it's disadvantaged communities, students, older adults, people with disabilities. And the last item I have is to look into the transformative projects language and possibly have that state policies or ordinances instead of policies and ordinances. And that's all I have on my list.
Okay, thank you, Alika. And, I just want to thank Beverly for, handling most of the presentation on this workshop. I really appreciate it. And so our next workshop, like we talked about, is February 2nd. We'll be talking about the application. And then the next one is February 8th, is scoring rubrics. So we'll probably have to be covering a lot in those workshops. So they'll probably be packed with stuff. And so as we talked about, we've pretty much gone through the guidelines, as everyone, except for the quick builds, I'm gonna keep saying that because that still needs to be worked out, that there's not a lot of changes this cycle. We talked about a lot of things, but in reality, there's not a lot of change. Probably the biggest change is the changing the threshold on the project size. So, but remember that the guidelines are draft until they are adopted at the March meeting, but I don't foresee them changing much between now and the March meeting. So unless something comes up, and if there is something that somebody really still is pondering, then we need to deal with that very soon. Okay, that's about it. So we got through everything today. I wasn't sure if we did, but so I appreciate all of the feedback, and thank you, everybody. And I can't think of anything else. So I think that we will pause for a few minutes here and see if there's any last questions or concerns or comments that come in.
Thank you, Lori. A question that was received earlier and from Paul Gergeis. What dimension of photo needs to be 300 dpi? An 8x10 at 300 dpi, a high pixel photo that's printed big enough has a low dpi, and vice versa.
Alika, do you understand that question?
Kind of. I don't know that much about photography and the quality of images, but I know when we were working with our legislative staff, they were hoping for obviously higher resolution and higher quality images. The only direction that they had given us was that 300 dpi. And I can always circle back, Justin, with the person who asked that question and get some clarification from our ledge staff.
Yeah, I will document the question and the contact info and send that to you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think it was also for the reporting too. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that.
We can, Lori, we can go back, and we need to clarify more with this group about what that means. We can do it
Yeah.
at a future workshop. So.
Okay.
Thank you. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Marina Espinoza.
Okay.
Hi, Marina Espinoza with the California State Association of Counties. I missed the opportunity to comment earlier, but I just wanted to share that we really appreciate the decision to simply encourage applicants to apply for the pro-housing designation program and to not include pro-housing as part of the scoring criteria for the ATP program. Thank you.
Thank you.
We received a few written comments from Keith Williams. Thank you. Great overview and discussion. From Lupe Camacho. Thank you. Great work. From Jan LePage. Thank you all and great job, Beverly, despite the family dog. And that concludes all written comments. And we have no additional attendees looking to make comment at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Justin. And what's I think we have a slide with our contact information. Okay, so here's all of our contact information. If you think of anything after this workshop that you still want to ask us or talk about, then please contact one of us and we will get back to you. So I think that's it. Nothing else, Justin?
No, not seeing anything else at this time, Lori. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon, and we'll see you at the next workshop. Bye.